Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Whenever you are watching us, I'm Margarita Šešelgytė. I'm the director of the Institute of International Relations and Political Science, Vilnius University. And welcome to our online discussion, 46th President of the United States of America, Forging a More Perfect Union. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you our first speaker, a former President of the Republic of Lithuania, Her Excellency Dalia Grybauskaitė. Madam President, as the world awaits the inauguration of the United States President in a few days, the US is experiencing the biggest political crisis probably since the September 11th. The society is divided. There has been an attack of insurrectionists on the Capitol, a symbol of the US democracy. At the same time, the numbers of COVID-19 cases are still mounting, making the US one of the most affected countries in the world. To solve these challenges is a tough task to any president. But Joe Biden is not a newcomer in the world politics. And Madam President, you have met him in person. What kind of leader he is? Does he have necessary qualities to solve these challenges? And in general, in the international politics, how much there is a space for individual personality to influence the course of the action?
So, hello, thank you very much for having me. And I want to explain a little bit my background. It's still Christmas tree of Vilnius. It's very beautiful in our national flag, very patriotic. So I am trying to bridge to your question about patriotism and leadership and the time in which we are watching American situation and the new presidents incoming in the next few days. It is a very critical time, not only for US, but also for all of us and for all the world and for the partners of US. Because of pandemic, because of economic crisis, and because of attack on democracy. In US and in some other countries also, we do have some elements of what we're watching of autocracy and kleptocracy including. And this in the pictures we saw in the beginning of this year and in recent days, of course, makes the incoming president's goals and tasks even more difficult. But I want to emphasize that America in this situation is, I would say that it's very good that we see incoming president as a Biden with his all working experience, with his whole life experience, and in such critical times, it is important to have a predictable person to whom you can trust and rely. And that's the goal which America now is facing, to unite nation and to have the leaders in whom you can trust. It's not only for the people of US, but also for us, allies of US. It's important to see a reliable country, a reliable partner, a trustable partner, and returning to the international stage partner.
Thank you, Madam President. Joe Biden stresses the need for a more perfect union, as he's about to start leading a very divided society, in particular after the insurrectionist attacks on the Capitol. What skills a leader needs in order to unite, but also to introduce reforms and drive society to progress? Because obviously there will be many people who will be unhappy with the reforms, and there will be even more division. How important is the support from within the society for effective leadership?
Our country's already gone through a lot of difficult and critical and crisis situations. The same in Europe in 2008, 2010, and now we're seeing a little bit different crisis. It's health and economic crisis. and the crisis of divisions in the society, especially in the US, and mistrust in society. But this phenomena of divisions is also not only unique for US. We do see the virtual reality occupying our countries sometimes, more or less, and virtual truth or fake truth is also finding its way via social media. Why there is a very wide and important question about responsibility of social media in creating this and supporting this kind of virtual or fake reality in parallel existence, or creating the parallel world in which our society is supposed to manage. So, but I want to say that in any difficult situation, there is a lot of possibilities and challenges, but a lot of chances and possibilities to go ahead, to unite, to reform, and to persuade. Because in peaceful times, it's very difficult to persuade people that you need to do a lot of things, reforming, even making not very popular moves. But during the crisis, for politicians, if they are sincere, if they're committed, if they're doing what they're saying, it's a lot easier to persuade people and to unite behind ourselves and himself. So I think that this situation is understood well by incoming President Biden. And I hope that what I'm hearing from him now about necessity to unite country, to be sincere with the people, to say the truth to the people, no matter how painful it could be. That's the goal. He knows what he needs to do, and he is pursuing this goal. From this point of view, he looks, as I said, trustful and reliable. And for us, outsiders or allies watching what's happening, we will be giving him full support and our shoulder to help him and support him in this endeavor, because it is important for our democracies and for democracy generally in the world to show that democracy is strong and capable to manage any crisis unfolding.
Thank you, Madam President. And you already started the discussion about the impact of what's happening in the United States on the world. And in fact, all the world is watching what's happening in the US over the already couple of months, but in particular, since the events in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday. And these events have demonstrated how fragile a democracy could be in the face of bad leadership. And these events were also applauded by the autocratic countries, which in the words of German Foreign Ministry were called enemies of democracy. China, Russia, Turkey were applauding the events, mocking the US electoral system, mocking the US democracy. The president of Iran said that the leader of Iran said that the president of the United States is the sick person, and that's what's happening when the sick person takes power. So there were a lot of criticism on the part of the democracies, but applauses on the part of the autocracies. And what does it mean for the world? Joe Biden, in his speech on the day of attacks, has said, "It is not who we are." So what is the US? What does the US leadership represent for the world? And what could be the consequences of the events like the war events in the capital? What could be the consequences of such events for the future of the world, for the democracies and autocracies, and potential rivalry between those two?
I think that after the Second World War, we were looking to US as example of democratic development, the country who was fully behind the values of democracy and human rights, and was example for all of us. And it was a pity to see the last 4 years growing elements of autocracy and kleptocracy in the country. And this was very painful to see, because we feel as allies this pain together with US people. And of course, partly this criticism has an element of truth, and this again even more painful, because to hear about US such kind of things which we used to hear about Russia or North Korea or other countries, it was somehow normal. And today, just I want to use probably the President Biden's feelings and mode. Let's leave it behind. Let's leave it and not talk about it. Let's concentrate about future. I'm coming on 20th, and let's start new moment and era in our country. And that's how he's concentrating his work now during this transition period. And I think, and for us, it's better to look forward and not paying attention. Yes, the history could have different, let's say, small roads to the left or right and not going straight. But now I see the prospect of US restoring its position, restoring its democratic institutions and strength and resilience. And thanks God that this coup, which was partly very much inspired, was not successful, but it teaches us all that the same as freedom we know in our countries, the same as freedom, democracy needs to be protected every day. And it's not given. It's not given as a gift. It is fought and fighted to preserve, and why we need to value and cherish it all together. And the challenges all the world is facing, not only US, with this virtual or fake reality which exists everywhere and explained everywhere. It comes the same with governance, the same with the vaccination process and trust to vaccines, to government. All these things are grown dangerously in all our countries, and we're all facing more or less the same. Why we so much understand what's going on in US, so much understand our challenges the Biden is facing, and why we will support him from all our hearts and as much as we can in European Union.
Thank you, Madam President. We've touched the question of the healing, of bringing country together. And now there is a big discussion in the United States about the potential impeachment of the President Donald Trump. And the question is about the certain accountability that President has to face. And the discussion goes around two concepts: the accountability and the healing. And there are two camps. One camp would say that accountability is very important in order to prevent the events like this, like events what happened on Wednesday in the future. But the rest would say that, it is important to leave what happened behind and start healing. So what is your opinion about that? I mean, what is more important, accountability or healing? And what should be the sequence of events? Should we start healing or without accountability, or should we start thinking and talking about accountability and then start healing?
I think it's a very sensitive situation in US. Its population is divided more or less half and half in supporting the outgoing President Trump and incoming President Biden. And what happened, of course, it is not only about presidents. It's not only about political parties. It's about situation in society in general. And today, these divisions are very painful and very radical in US, as in some other countries. So why condemnation is absolutely necessary, and political also. But to politicize situation now, I think it is also very dangerous to go in speed, having in mind only about 10 days left for President Trump in office. That's clear that this process will be not, will not roll in full. If it will be impeachment, for example, but condemnation, it is possible by both House and the Senate. And it is impossible. It is important for country to clearly state and evaluate what happened, but it is not presumed necessary to hunt. It's not necessarily presumed to hunt. Sometimes healing could start with naming, shaming, but then looking only for what it's necessary to do, but not what happened. Because our history in our region also has an examples of choice to look backwards and hunt who did something 50 or 60 or 40 years ago, or just to unite people to concentrate for the future of building, let's say, our country. These challenges and these questions practically all countries are facing, and US especially now is facing. And I think that people need to be allowed to discuss this openly, to express their opinion, and be united in concentrating their solving problems what they're having today with the health and economic crisis, with labor market, and generally with the future debt situation in US. So why condemnation is absolutely necessary. For the rest, it's for politicians of US to decide. It's not for us outsiders to dictate, because we do not able to feel in full what American people are feeling, in full understand, and it's really internal thing. But condemnation is not only internal, is international, it's global, how we evaluate all of us. And condemnation was given and done by all partners of America, and that's already done. But internally, they need to themselves to decide what to do. Of course, America gone through a few recent crises, as September 11, some other, and now this one, which was created fully by politicians and themselves. And to heal and unite a nation sometimes takes a lot more than one president's cadency. Because it is a more difficult process and question. It's not just to hunt, to persuade, to try to look for the enemies inside. Because unity is very easy to be achieved if you have enemy outside. During the wars or somebody is attacking your country, it's very easy to unite and persuade. But if you have such divisions, such fake world created in parallel, it's very difficult, and it will take a lot more time. So it's up to politicians to decide at this stage what and how they would like to go. And I'm happy that incoming President Biden is concentrating not on this. He is concentrating on future, what he needs to be done, because 4 years is not much time to solve so many questions which occurred in recent years in the US and in the world in general, such as climate change, as international organizations where United States are withdrawn from international arena. It's a lot of problems which America used to take on its shoulders as a responsibility, and I hope that we'll share this responsibility again internationally with President Biden. So this question is fully for healing question, is fully for the country itself. It's we from outside cannot help with our recommendations or persuasions. What we can do is support Biden's intentions to unite country, to go ahead with the United States and become again trustful and reliable partner for all of us. That's probably a long answer to your question.
Thank you, Madam President. Leaving the past behind and concentrating on to the future, I believe for us in Lithuania, US leadership is essential in terms of supporting the existing international system, but in particular in the field of security. From your experience, what could you see what other areas could you name which are very important to have the US leadership? Climate change, you mentioned. What else? Where we would like to have more of the US leadership in the future?
Of course, for us, in our region at least, the security element is the most important. Because after the Second World War and now, the challenges, of course, different, but they are still very huge on security, in security area, and presence in Europe and in our region of US very seriously is important, and we all the time supporting the larger presence of US troops, including on our territory, which is Baltic states are some kind of border between the third countries and NATO ally. So why I very much hope that, of course, we cannot expect that US will become the same as it was 4 years ago. The country also changed, and you cannot repeat the history and go to the same water again. It will be different, but the challenges are also different. Security challenges are also different. And I hope that, especially Biden knows, he was vice president with the Obama administration, they will not repeat the reset failure with Russia, for example, as it was done during Obama administration, and will return and will not even go to that direction. But for us, not only security, of course, the economic leadership, the international trade leadership, the returning and support the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, all these international institutions which could help not only developed countries to survive these difficult times, but also all global society to survive. Because today we are talking about global challenges as pandemic, for example, or economic critical situation because of pandemic is global, and global leadership needed via international global organizations also needed. Of course, I'm not saying that they are very fit today to do this goal, but reforms are necessary in most of them, but withdrawal from international institutions, as we saw during the Trump administration, was a mistake, and it even more devaluated possibility of global instruments to be used for solving global challenges.
Thank you, Madam President, for your answers, very elaborated answers. And one last very, very short question. So a piece of advice for incoming president.
I hate to advise anybody. I think he knows what he is supposed to do. He is and have all necessary features to go into office in these difficult times. He's sincere, he has an experience, he knows how to find the solution, even going to the another side, not only his own political colleagues, but also to the competing different political groups. He knows a lot of international actors around the world with his experience. So I just want to wish him strength, patience, and just to keep going, sincerely explaining to the nation about reality, about real situation. And I'm sure that he will do his job at most as much as he is capable. And I think at this time, this president for America is some kind of saver for America and saver for global world.
Thank you very much for your time. And now we are moving to our next speaker.
Well, really, thank you very much, Margarita, for inviting us to participate. And I'm also truly humbled to introduce our colleagues and friends, Marty Linsky and also Ed O Malley.
Thank you. Thank you, Rytis, very much for your introduction, and also Mr. Linsky and Mr. O Malley for your time to contribute to this discussion. And without wasting the precious time, I'll turn directly to the questions. And the first one I'd like to pose to Mr. Linsky. Mr. Linsky, you are one of the founders of the adaptive leadership theory, which argues that the leadership is a mobilization of people in order to solve complex problems and to ensure prosperity. How the adaptive leadership can be instrumental for the solution of contemporary challenges, such as, for instance, climate change, pandemic, divided societies. What advices this theory could give to the incoming President Joe Biden?
To take your question, whether you're talking about climate change or you're talking about the pandemic, one of the things that we have been able to observe is that the facts do not get us to a solution. And that is really characteristic of really daunting problems. That is, the facts are relevant, but they're not controlling. What makes difficult problems difficult is that they are value problems. They are about what people believe, what people care about, how people look at the world, people's self-identity. And so more information about climate change, more information about the pandemic is not going to solve the problem. I was on a call yesterday with a person who is trying to get people to take the vaccine, and he's meeting a lot of resistance. And his approach was to give people more facts, more information, more data. And what we began to talk about is that their resistance doesn't come from lack of information. It doesn't, and their resistance is not coming from their brains and their logic systems, but their resistance is coming from their hearts and their stomachs, from their belief systems. And when you are dealing with people's values and their identities and their beliefs, you have to take different approaches than when you're dealing with people's logic systems.
Thank you. Thank you, Marty, for your answer. And now I'd like to turn to Ed and pose the second question, which is related to the latest events in the United States. The riot in Capitol, and following the US debates, I can distinguish at least two different lines of argumentation about what has happened and how to proceed further. One of the lines stresses the importance to heal and invites people and parties to forget what has happened. On the other hand, the other one argues that there could no be sustainable healing without accountability. Accountability has to be defined. So what line of the argumentation would you subscribe to, and how the adaptive leadership might help to find a solution?
Well, Margarita, thank you for the question. And it's good to be with my Lithuanian friends again, discussing adaptive leadership. I think your question is really powerful, and I think it's a great example to use to talk about adaptive leadership. And adaptive leadership is really needed when there is no clear way forward. And so your question was, should we take the pathway of healing or the pathway of accountability? My sense is it probably needs to be both. And the adaptive nature of this will dictate, when do we need to dial up the accountability and when do we need to dial up the healing. My sense is that it also depends deeply on what your purpose is, on what, adaptive leadership is very connected to purpose. So when someone is exercising adaptive leadership, they have to be very clear on their purpose. Right now, I sense in America, in the aftermath of the riots, there are some people whose purpose is chiefly accountability. Chiefly, we must hold these people accountable. I think there are other people whose purpose is chiefly about healing. I do sense personally that the biggest challenge facing our country right now is the continuing divide between the two tribes, the more conservative faction and the more progressive faction. My sense is leadership needs to be practiced in a way that brings those two tribes together more. If we don't find a way to bring ourselves together, I don't see how we solve those other challenges you were just talking about, the pandemic, climate change, and the like. So I think the challenge for our nation's leaders, from national government to local, is how to balance that need for accountability with the need for healing in a way that brings the tribes closer together so they can work together with a common purpose. That, to me, seems the biggest challenge, and adaptive leadership seems like the right tool.
I think one of the things that Ed was driving at was that the binary choice that you posed is part of the problem. That whenever we see a binary choice like that, we begin to think about what are the other ways of framing, what are the other diagnoses. And I think, as Ed was saying, if we stick to the binary choices, that a huge portion of the community is going to feel left out. So that doesn't seem useful if what we're talking about is making progress and moving forward. So the question really for us, I think, is how do we think about this challenge in a non-binary way? And I think Ed was getting at that when he was talking about, instead of choosing between accountability and getting past those events, doing both at the same time. And that will not make anybody completely happy, but it won't make anybody feel left behind either.
Thank you, Marty, for your answer as well to this very complicated, indeed, question. Because what I see now, so the both camps tend to stick to either one or another, and I think that it is a challenge how to put everything into one goal and proceed. And my question would be to both of you. So adaptive leadership, how could it chime in and be instrumental in order to reach this goal?
I think, we've just come through a period, both the election and, using yesterday as an example, the impeachment vote, where the choices are binary. When you go into the voting booth, as you know from the Lithuania experience, you can't say maybe, and you can't say one in column A and one in column B. You've got to say column A or column B. Those are inherently polarizing processes. But I am very optimistic because the incoming administration, Biden's career has been very different. He is not known primarily as a person of a clear and rigid ideology. He got in a lot of trouble early in the campaign by bragging about how he was willing to cooperate with people who had very different views than he does. The second thing is that in order to make progress on difficult, value-laden issues, like the vaccination, like climate change, there are some people who are going to feel as if they have not been adequately heard. And Biden is a kind of person who likes to pay attention to those people. Trump paid attention to the people who agreed with him. Biden likes to pay attention to people who are in pain. Let me say one other thing before turning it back to Ed, and that is I have a former student who is a member of Congress, a Republican, and he voted to accept the Electoral College results and took a lot of heat for it. But what he said to me over the phone was that most of the people he knows in his district who voted for Trump, and Trump carried his district easily, were people that were in pain. And he said that what he's been trying to do is to acknowledge the pain, acknowledge their loss, acknowledge their fears, rather than telling them everything is going to be okay. And he has found that to be useful in getting past the heat of the moment.
Yeah, the few things that I would add about the relationship between adaptive leadership and the situation we're in here in the States related to the Capitol and the riot and the inauguration and the impeachment is, adaptive leadership provides a wonderful framework, a wonderful lens to look at problems through. It helps provide a structure for thinking about the challenge of the situation. And it tends to help people resist the temptation to simply fall into their default behaviors, how they would normally think. And two examples come to mind. I think there's a big question right now about whether the events on January 6th at the United States Capitol were a prologue or an epilogue. Were they the epilogue to the last several years? Are we finally coming together because of this moment? Or is this a prologue to difficult things to come? Adaptive leadership helps you hold both those interpretations. It doesn't let you fall completely into the camp of one or the other. And obviously, if it's a prologue, we'll act one way. If it's an epilogue, we might lead differently. So knowing how to hold both those and think about the right way forward. The second, one of the other elements of adaptive leadership that feels ripe in this moment is the idea of when we're using the adaptive leadership framework, we are focusing on who has to do the work. Where does the locus of work, the focus of work really reside? And one of the interesting questions I think at play right now is national politics. Is that a leading indicator or a lagging indicator of what's happening in our country? I like to hope and believe that Joe Biden, President-elect Biden, will be the source of us coming together. But I also feel that the real focus of work is probably in neighborhoods and communities, and that what's happening in our government is reflecting what's happening on the ground. And if we don't change things on the ground, we're not going to change things in Washington, D.C. So I think one of the benefits of an adaptive leadership lens for Lithuania or for the United States is it doesn't let you fall into one way of thinking about things. It forces you to hold open multiple interpretations for how your leadership and where your leadership is needed today.
Well, I also want to underscore Ed's point about not relying on people in authority. One of the sources, I think, of Trump's success, political success, was that he told people he was going to fix their problems for them.
The fear of adaptive leadership argues that people are often misled by the illusion of dysfunctional system, whereas in reality, we see the opposite. Even bad systems, malfunctioning systems, tend to be very resistant to change. They do work. And that's happening due to established values and practices supported by those who function within the system. People tend to close their eyes and not see the real challenges. And it is very comfortable to live in the system. To change the system brings uncomfort. And if Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, was a symbol of the United States as a system, what the US politicians and maybe also the society do not want to admit to see within the system. What is that people afraid to change? What is that is not relevant any longer, but very difficult to give up?
Well, I think it's a great question and very relevant. His mantra was, "Make America Great Again." And the most important word in that mantra to me was again, because what he was signaling and what resonated with so many people was image in their heads of a time when they were comfortable, confident, and had a lot of power. And what has happened is that the values that they believed in and their place in the world or their place in the community was beginning to change in ways that did not feel good to them. And what Trump was promising was that he was going to return back to a world in which they were the dominant faction. Now, we sometimes forget, I think, that the United States is a unique experiment in human history. There has never been a country that tried to govern itself with as heterogeneous a population as the United States has. And what is happening now is that the dominant factions, and I'm saying that not only about race, but it's partially about race, but also about economic status, about geography, a whole set of changes are taking place that make lots and lots of people feel like they have no role anymore. And what Trump promised them was not that he was going to find a way for them going forward, but that he was going to roll things back to the way they were. Right? And that's a fantasy. It's an illusion. But it's an illusion that appealed to people because it was consistent with their fears and their worries about their own futures. I think that's, there are, in reference to the way you framed the question, I think it touches very much at the heart of the way we think about how to address problems from an adaptive perspective. I just want to underscore what you were saying. One is that the status quo is not an accident. It's the product of lots and lots of values and the way things want to be. Second, there's no such thing as a dysfunctional society or a dysfunctional family or a dysfunctional organization, because every organization is designed to produce the result it's currently getting. And third, what flows from that is when you try to introduce significant change, the people who are benefiting from the current system are going to resist. People do not resist change per se. We all welcome change. We embrace change when we think it's going to be good for us. What people resist is loss. And the support that Trump received for 4 years was people who feared the losses that they were experiencing or were worried about.
Margaret, what I would add to this, I love the question and I love the thinking about symbols. And I think one of the biggest challenges facing America right now is that Donald Trump, for one very large faction, is a symbol of everything that is good and right about the future and the past. But for another very large faction, Donald Trump is a symbol of everything that is wrong about America in the future and in the past. And I think from an adaptive standpoint, symbols matter. And if our purpose is to bring the country together, we have to be careful of how do we invent new symbols? How do we help people orient to new symbols? And how do we, and I'm not saying this is easy, but how do we recognize where our bias is, our default is? And if our purpose is to reach across to the other and create more unity, which that's not the purpose of a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people, their purpose is to win, their purpose is vengeance, their purpose is for their faction to be right. But if our purpose is to bring people together, I think we have to be aware of what is our bias just on that symbol question. Where do we naturally go? And how do we speak in a way about that symbol that doesn't further alienate the faction that sees that symbol very differently than we do? I think that's really hard.
If I can chip in, I was always really going through this moment, and still this really very much resonates with me. This discussion we had exactly on how to evaluate the interests and also how to understand what the interest might be. And I have to admit that when looking into the U.S. and Lithuanian relationships, and independently of any administration, I think the commitment is there. It's sort of rather well understood at the also mid-level defense security policy establishments, that there are certain commitments we really need to abide by, because that's how the system holds. And there are a number of course, there are a number of ways how to check in, and there are a number of exercises, military exercises or other activities you conduct with the partners in order to check where do we stand on these issues. The question for me was about the other aspect of the Trump administration's narrative, America First. Which has also created a lot of anxiety with our European colleagues, and here I think the challenge also for the European community would be on how to convince that it's not only the exploitation of the American let's say the resources and the leadership resources, but also that this is not only the responsibility but also is a benefit for the US. That to have the working in partnership with the transatlantic community, with Lithuania, with other ones, and that's we need to look into America First, into something more uniting and perhaps more future oriented. And apparently there are a number of signals being given by the very experienced team of President Biden. Though, of course, we see the ones who been in the foreign policy for years, for 20 to 25 years, and obviously there is a good understanding on how to I would say to project the future relationships on sort of starting with some positive aspects.
It's a wonderful example because nobody can be against America First, but that's at such a high level of abstraction as to be meaningless. What does America First look like when the question is withdrawing troops from Afghanistan? That's where the disagreement is, right? And both sides of that argument think that they're practicing America First, right? But it's when those values get closer to the ground, where there's a conflict, that the value conflict comes into play. Not at the high level of abstraction, but where it starts to bite. Ed,
yeah, and Marty, if I could, I think, Rytis, I love that you brought up the phrase America First. And if I were living elsewhere and I was in a country that was an ally of the United States, I think it would be really important to think about why that phrase America First captivated 75 million Americans. One way to interpret that is for 75 million Americans, they don't feel like America has been treating itself as a priority, right? I'm not here to say that's true or not true, but I think one way to interpret all of the support for that America First type rhetoric is you're not taking care of your own people. We're taking care of too many other people, not our own people. I'm not here to say what's right or wrong there, but I think it's really interesting data. And for America to be a strong ally to other countries around the world, we need to have a unity of enough of our populace, of our body politic, that feels like we have taken care of ourselves and therefore we can help take care of others. And who knows what the facts are, but the fact that so many millions of Americans don't feel that that's the case, don't feel that they have been taken care of by the elites, by those in authority, by those in power, and that Donald Trump was the symbol of finally people will listen to us, I think is a concern. And I also don't think it's solved just by the election of President-elect Joe Biden. I think that issue is still alive, and whether that issue is addressed or not will have a lot to do with the degree to which President-elect Biden, his cabinet, and I think more importantly, people on the ground can exercise what we would call adaptive leadership, finding ways to bridge factions, bring people together, create common purpose. So my hope is that, that'll happen, but that's the test, and we'll see.
This conversation, this piece of the conversation also illustrates, Margarita, another central tool of adaptive leadership, which is that the diagnosis part of understanding problems. What is the problem here? Is really very important, and we encourage people to be open to uncomfortable interpretations, uncomfortable diagnoses, not to gravitate toward, default toward comfortable, easy interpretations, but to be open to the possibility that there are some uncomfortable ways of understanding what's going on here that we need to consider and think about, because they might lead us to different choices.
Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing in this issue. I think that would be very interesting part for people in Lithuania to listen to, because for us, U.S. presence in Europe, U.S. military presence in Europe is the most important thing. Our security cannot be ensured without the U.S. presence, and that's a full stop. So naturally, people seek for the ways to reassure themselves that U.S. is present. And I think that the first shock was with the election of Donald Trump, when he started to raise the questions about the NATO's purpose, saying that NATO is obsolete. And that was a big shock for us, because we tended to believe that, it's sort of a given that US will be present all the time. And now there is a big relief when Biden administration is coming that, things are changing back to what it was. But these things are not changing. We're going forward, as you said. I mean, the American society is changing. So my question would be, so what Lithuanian politicians, decision makers should do to invest more in the US presence here, to reassure themselves, apart from that they have to do their homework, to invest more in the defense, that's also important. But I think that the relationship vis-a-vis United States is changing, because the society is changing, the world is changing. So what should we do?
Well, I don't know the facts very well, but I think Trump provided a service by raising some issues that were below the surface, but were very much present. One is around immigration, and one is around relations with our allies. And the dependency on the United States was, in one could argue, was actually disempowering other countries. So, without knowing any of the facts, if I take your question at face value, I would say, well, one thing that Lithuania could do would be to lead an effort within NATO for the countries in the NATO alliance to pay their fair share and not rely completely on the United States financially for international security. That would be an example of how you could make it easier for the United States to fulfill its commitments, rather than assuming that plaque on the wall will do it for you.
Well, Marty,
or that Joe Biden will do it for you.
Yeah, Margarita, if I could build on that, one of the tenets of adaptive leadership is this idea that you have to have enough heat, enough disequilibrium for change to take place. And I think one danger from Lithuania's perspective, I think, one thing I would watch out for if I was Lithuania or in your shoes would be people taking great comfort in the election of Joe Biden, allowing the heat to go down, right? Because the underlying issues are still there. And real leadership is when you can mobilize people, you can raise the heat when there's not a presenting crisis. So now that Joe Biden has been elected and will soon be sworn in as president of the United States, the temptation for countries in NATO, for example, might be to relax, to feel like, okay, everything's fine, we can relax. And what Marty's suggesting is now's the time for real leadership among our allies and other countries and within the United States to actually continue to put pressure to solve the underlying issues. Because what led to the election of Donald Trump is still alive in our country. And if it's not resolved, it'll bubble up again. So I think that the challenge is how to interpret the events in ways that don't let you off the hook. And that's one of the things we're talking about right now. That's one of the tools of adaptive leadership. It forces you to think about what's our contribution to this situation and how do we make sure we interpret things in ways that don't just make us feel good, but that might implicate us for further action.
Thank you. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Ed. And now let me turn back to the United States. And I'm thinking about the international stage, and there are lots of debates about the lack of the US leadership on the international stage during the Trump's administration. And now, as you said, that everyone's hoping that things would change overnight and we will be seeing more of the United States internationally, in particular on the issues which are very important and pressing, like climate change, cooperation between the democracies. But as we already have discussed, the things are changing. And I recall the speech of Joe Biden immediately after the events in Capitol. He said, "This is not US." So taking upon on those words, so what is the US? What can we expect? I know it's very difficult, to anticipate, but what is your take? So what is the US now? What will be the US leadership? What can we expect on the international stage?
I'll take a quick stab at this one. I heard that speech also, and what I heard President-elect Joe Biden saying is, we don't want this to be the US. I think it is. I mean, it is right now. And I don't like that. And I don't want to believe that. But the facts are there. We have riots happening in our United States Capitol. We had riots happening across our country this past summer. We have a level of tension in our country that is unprecedented, historians believe, since the Civil War of our country. So I took President-elect Biden's statement as an aspiration. And I think we have to hold open to the fact that actually what you see is what's happening. If somebody were up on Mars, my friend Marty Linsky taught me this way of thinking. If somebody was up on Mars looking down at the United States right now, how would they describe the United States? And those people would not be biased by their hearts and their feelings and their past and their hopes, and they would just be descriptive. And right now, I think we are a very divided, torn country. And there is still greatness. There's so much, especially at the local level, happening that is inspiring and the production of the vaccines at the rate they were able to be produced. I mean, there's so many beautiful stories to be told, but the true story is we're a complicated nation right now, and our future is complicated and unknown. Marty?
Your take that, I'm sorry, Marty, just a quick reaction. Your take that US will be concentrating, first of all, on healing the wounds within, and then we will talk about the leadership on the international stage.
I'm no expert in international diplomacy and politics, but it seems to me that if the United States is divided within, if we will be of little support and use to people external to the United States. And the more divided, the more tension, the more we are not united, the less useful we'll be for our allies around the world. So the challenge of those in authority right now is how to bring our country together so we can have strength here and provide strength around the world.
Thank you. Marty, sorry for interrupting.
Well, I agree with everything that Ed said, as always. But it does seem to me important to underscore the point that the issues that the concerns that brought Donald Trump to power and the concerns that resulted in the riots at the Capitol last week are not going away because Joe Biden was elected. They're only going to go away if they begin to be addressed. And part of those are domestic, how do we live in a heterogeneous world? How do we find a place in the future for people who feel like they've lost their footing in this society? On the international front, it is going to be some time, I think, before there's some kind of balance restored between the United States taking care of itself and the United States resuming a role in the international order that looks something like it used to be. Let me give you an example of how I think that nuance, that balance. Samantha Power, who was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, is Biden's nominee to head in the Agency for International Development. Now, that's a very interesting choice because although she clearly insisted that she be a member of the National Security Council, it is not a national security kind of job. It's a kind of job where her humanitarian values will be consistent with the mission of the agency. But my guess is, I know her a little bit, but without knowing very much about the situation, is that she was also a candidate for some roles in the administration which would have been more directly around national security. And I think it's a brilliant choice because she will be passionate and competent at figuring out aid policy, but she will not be in a position to really affect military policy and national security issues directly. So I think there's going to be some lurching. It's not going to be a straight line, and we really don't know. But as Ed was saying, no progress is going to be made until the concerns of the people who voted for Trump are addressed and listened to. And Biden is a wonderful person to do that kind of work.
Also looking from this international perspective, what we expect. Of course, pandemic slows down a lot of things. And I think that that's also an aspect that in international relations right now, not that many major initiatives are happening. It's very obvious. Everyone is concerned on how to contain the pandemic. But the huge issues will remain. Russia for once. So how the new administration will address Russia. This is essential. And then arms control aspects again. Also, this is an issue. First, perhaps less of the domestic policy, but it's obviously you need the ones who are competent to deal to negotiate the rather complex agreements. And again, Middle East aspect, Iran. Also, these topics. They are right now awaiting the new administration. The good aspect is, again, also it's from a adaptive leadership perspective. It seems also slightly technical that you appoint also these strong teams. Who have the capacity, who have the expertise, and they can really absorb certain issues. So they will make a good analysis. Where do we stand now, and what are exactly we are negotiating? And also these, we do not expect the quick solutions for these issues. These are long-term or the midterm issues to resolve. So. We also look rather optimistically on the U.S. capacity to interconnect again into some of the issues. For example, also once again, the World Health Organization aspect is will the U.S. came back to this organization, and what would be the policy vis-a-vis this the global organization as such. So. I would say there is a confidence that the strong teams and strong administration would be capable of immediately start, despite of the internal problems.
Yes, and I would go back to what Ed said, however, which is don't let that optimism turn into relaxation and passivity. Lithuanians have the agency to help create the future they want to have. And that is true both in the international level and at the domestic level. I think one of the things that we've learned or had reinforced in the past year is that democracy is not a spectator sport. The obligations of living in a democratic environment is that you have to play a role and you have to be actively civically engaged. It's really about the core of the work that Ed O Malley has done at the Kansas Leadership Center.
Well, and Marty, if I could just chime in, I think the work of the Adaptive Leadership Center in Lithuania is so important because it's not about just building the adaptive leadership in one person or two people. It's about saturating a nation, a state, a group, saturating with enough people who know how to exercise adaptive leadership to help people move forward. I'm so impressed with the work of the Adaptive Leadership Center in Lithuania, and so glad to be able to call you all colleagues and to walk alongside you, to learn from you, to learn with you in this very, very important work.
Well said, and thank you for this opportunity to spend this time with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you very much, Marty, for being with us and trying to provide the insight for us, what's happening in the United States and what's waiting for us. Thank you very much. Good luck with the new challenges and new opportunities. And we'll talk probably later. We'll see how successful the new administration will be.
We hope so, Margarita. Good luck to you. Take care. Take care, right? It's wonderful to see you.
Take care. Be well, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Ed. Thank you.